People serving in the military are subject to a separate system of laws, courts, and procedures. Defendants retain certain rights guaranteed under the Constitution, such as the right to representation. The military death penalty has been used sparsely outside times of war. Only a few individuals are on the military death row, which is based at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. All were convicted of murder. There have been no executions in the modern era of the death penalty. The use of capital punishment by the United States military is a legal penalty in martial criminal justice. Despite its legality, capital punishment has not been imposed by the U.S. military in over 60 years. The United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces ruled in 1983 that the military death penalty was unconstitutional, and after new standards intended to rectify the Armed Forces Court of Appeals objections, the military death penalty was reinstated by an executive order of President Ronald Reagan the following year. Currently, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, 14 offenses are punishable by death: mutiny or sedition, misbehavior before the enemy, subordinate compelling surrender, improper use of countersign, forcing a safeguard, espionage, aiding the enemy, improper hazarding of vessel, murder, rape. Another 4 provisions of the Uniform Code of Military Justice carry a death sentence only if the crime is committed during times of war: desertion, assaulting or willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer, lurking as a spy or acting as a spy, and misbehavior of a sentinel or lookout. Capital cases are tried in courts martial before a panel of at least 12 military members. If the defendant is an enlisted service member, he or she may opt for at least 1/3 of the panel to also be of enlisted rank. All members of the panel must outrank the accused. The defendant cannot plead guilty to the charges. A 2/3 majority is enough for conviction, but unanimity is required to issue a death sentence during the penalty phase of the proceeding. All death sentences are automatically appealed, first to the Court of Criminal Appeals for the military service concerned, then to the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. The sentence must be personally confirmed by the President of the United States. Prior to 1991, the methods of execution approved by Headquarters, Department of the Army were hanging, firing squad or electrocution. Electrocution was added as an option in the 1950s, but could only be used at a specific confinement facility designated by Headquarters, and only be performed by a professional civilian executioner. An electric chair was installed at the old United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, but was never used. The last military execution occurred in 1961 by hanging. Currently, lethal injection is the only method. The U.S. military currently has 4 inmates, all men on death row. These are their names and crimes committed. Ronald A. Gray. Gray was born in Cochran, Georgia on August 14, 1965. But grew up in Liberty City, a public housing project in Miami. He enlisted at age 18, in 1984, and was assigned to the Target Acquisition Battery, 1-39 Field Artillery Battalion. At the time of his arrest, he was stationed at Fort Bragg, near Fayetteville, North Carolina, holding the rank of Specialist 4. E4 and serving as a cook assigned to 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne. Ronald A. Gray, killed and raped 5 women. Linda Jean Coates, was 23 years. Murdered on April 27, 1986. Tammy Kofor Wilson was 18 years. Gray murdered her on December 11, 1986. Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay was 18 years. Killed on December 15, 1986. Mary Ann Lang Namath was 19 years. Gray killed her on January 3, 1987. Kimberly Ann Ruggles was 23 years old. Gray killed her on January 6, 1987. A military court also tried Gray. The General Court-Martial lasted from December 1987 until April 1988 and was composed of commissioned and enlisted soldiers at Fort Bragg. Gray was convicted of 12 charges, including the premeditated murders of Ruggles and Vickery Clay, the attempted premeditated murder of Lang Namath, 3 rapes, 2 robberies, and 2 counts of forcible sodomy. On April 12, 1988, he was unanimously sentenced to death. In addition, he was dishonorably discharged, ordered to forfeit all of his pay and allowances, and reduced in rank to Private E1. On July 29, 1988, the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division approved the sentence. Gray was 22 at the time of his sentencing. On November 26, 2008, a federal judge issued a stay of execution stopping the planned December 10th execution. Gray is the military's longest-serving death row inmate. As of February 2023, Ronald A. Gray has spent more than 34 years on the U.S. military death row. Hasan Akbar. Akbar was born Mark Fidel Cools on April 21, 1971, and grew up in Watts, Los Angeles, California. His father, John Cools, converted to Islam while in prison on a gang-related charge, and changed his surname to Akbar before his release in 1974. Akbar's mother later converted to Islam before marrying William M. Bilal, also a Muslim convert. She took the name Karan Bilal. She changed her son's name to Hasan Akbar, to reflect his father's surname and their religion. He was raised from a young age as a Muslim. In 1988, Akbar was admitted to the University of California, Davis. He graduated 9 years later in 1997 with bachelor's degrees in both aeronautical and mechanical engineering. The university said that Cools had stopped and restarted his studies during those years, lengthening the time it took him to complete his degrees. He participated in the Reserve Officers Training Corps during college, but did not receive a commission. Deeply in debt, he joined the Army as an enlisted member. Joining the United States Army, he was assigned to the 326th Engineer Battalion of the 101st Airborne, and was eventually deployed to Kuwait. He was charged in a hand grenade and shooting attack that killed 2 U.S. officers and wounded 14 soldiers on March 23, 2003. The attack took place at Camp Pennsylvania, Kuwait, a rear base camp for the invasion where Akbar threw hand grenades into a tent during early morning when the majority of troops were sleeping and fired his rifle into the ensuing chaos. Although Akbar confessed to the crimes, his lawyers claimed that he had a history of mental illness which was known to the military. During jury selection, the defense lawyers were said to favor jurors who have had experience dealing with mental illness. Akbar also suffers from sleep apnea and fell asleep several times during court proceedings. He was tried in Fort Bragg, North Carolina in front of a military jury of 9 officers, with ranks from major to colonel, and 6 senior sergeants. There were 13 men and 2 women on the jury. On April 21, 2005, he was found guilty of 2 counts of premeditated murder of Army Captain Christopher Seifert, 27, who was shot in the back, and Air Force Mike Gregory Stone, 40, struck by shrapnel, and 3 counts of attempted premeditated murder. On April 28, 2005, after about 7 hours of deliberation, Akbar was sentenced to death. The sentence will be reviewed by a commanding officer and automatically appealed. As of February 2023, Hasan Akbar, also known as Mark Fidel Cools, has spent more than 17 years on the U.S. military death row. Timothy Hennis was born on February 24, 1958, grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from Mayo High School in 1976. His father, Robert Hennis, was a manager at IBM Rochester during the 1970s. Hennis worked in Rochester until he joined the United States Army in 1980. Hennis later married. He and his wife, Angela, had a daughter in 1985. Around May 1985, Hennis worked as a parachute rigger at Fort Bragg. Since the Eastburn family was planning to relocate to England so that Eastburn could take up a liaison job with the Royal Air Force, Katie made arrangements to rehouse the family's English setter Dixie, posting an advertisement in the local newspaper Beeline Grab Bragg. On May 7, 1985, 27-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Timothy Hennis responded to the ad, visiting the Eastburn family home. Hennis's young family owned a Spitz at the time. After chatting with Katie, Hennis took home Dixie. On May 11th, Katie did not respond to her husband Gary's routine phone call. On May 12th, a concerned neighbor named Bob Seafelt and a police officer visited the home, where they discovered the remains of Katie, Kara, and Aaron. Katie had been stripped to the waist, raped, and stabbed 15 times. Semen was also found inside her body. Kara had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest, while Aaron had been bludgeoned in the chest and back. The youngest child, Jana, survived the attack, but was dehydrated and suffering from diarrhea. Timothy Hennis was arrested and charged with the crimes. Hennis's first trial occurred in Cumberland County in the summer of 1986. Before the trial, the prosecution offered Hennis a plea bargain, 2 counts of second-degree murder, with a likely penalty of 2 consecutive life sentences. Hennis turned down the plea bargain. Following 10 hours of deliberation, the jury found Hennis guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree rape. On July 8, he was subsequently sentenced to death. Hennis was transferred to death row at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hennis was found guilty of the May 9, 1985 murder of Catherine Eastburn and her 2 children. Previously convicted in 1986 by the state of North Carolina, retried and acquitted in 1989, and widely reported as exonerated. Recalled to active duty for military court-martial under separate sovereignty. On September 4, 2020, attorneys for Hennis filed a writ for certiorari with the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court denied the writ on January 11, 2021. As of February 2023, Timothy Hennis has spent more than 12 years on the U.S. military death row. Nidal Hassan. Nidal was born on September 8, 1970. He was an American former Army major, physician and mass murderer convicted of killing 13 people. and injuring more than 30 others in the Fort Hood mass shooting on November 5, 2009. Hassan enlisted in the United States Army in 1988 after graduating from high school. He attended college during this time, earning an associate degree in science from Virginia Western Community College in 1992. In 1995, he graduated from Virginia Tech with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. He completed both of these programs with Latin honors. He was commissioned as an officer in the Army Medical Department in 1997, and enrolled at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. Hassan's performance was marginal while enrolled at Uniformed Services University. He was on academic probation during much of the 6 years he required to complete the 4-year curriculum and graduate medical school. Hassan was an Army Medical Corps psychiatrist. He admitted to the shootings at his court-martial in August 2013. A jury panel of 13 officers convicted him of 13 counts of premeditated murder, 32 counts of attempted murder, and unanimously recommended he be dismissed from the service and sentenced to death. Hassan is incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas awaiting execution. As of February 2023, Nidal Hassan has spent more than 7 years on the U.S. military death row. Thank you for watching Death Row.